Behind every American musical revolution, there is a ghost story, a history deliberately misplaced. For decades, we were taught the story of rock and roll began with a hip-shaking Southern boy. We were told Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll. But ask the legends who built the houses that Elvis walked through, ask the Beatles, ask Bruce Springsteen, ask the Rolling Stones, and they will whisper one name, Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was the architect. He was the brilliant, complicated black man who fused the raw energy of the blues, the storytelling rhythm of country, and the pulse of R&B into a new electric force. He created the sound that became the anthem for a generation, integrating the dance floors before America even figured out how to integrate its schools. Yet, his story is not a clean, polished narrative of pure genius. It is the jagged, vital, and tragic account of a pioneer who faced down racism on the stage and in the courthouse. He changed the world with a guitar, only to find himself fighting the racist agenda of the Mann Act, the system, and sometimes, his own worst instincts. This is the uncompromising truth of Chuck Berry, the undisputed king of rock and roll. What price must a pioneer pay? Tell us your first memory of a Chuck Berry song in the comments below. The story of Chuck Berry begins far from the bright lights of fame, in a place that shielded him from the harshest realities of American racism, yet defined his music, the Ville, in St. Louis, Missouri. Born Charles Edward Anderson Berry on October 18, 1926, he was the fourth of 6 children to Martha Berry, a school teacher, and Henry Berry, a contractor and deacon at their Baptist church. The Ville was considered a middle-class neighborhood for black people, a rare segregated sanctuary in North St. Louis. Chuck himself recounted that his neighborhood was so deeply segregated that he didn't see a white person until he was about 3 years old. The sight was so unusual that he initially believed the white firefighters trying to put out a blaze looked that way because they were scared of the house fire. This early, almost innocent, interpretation of racial difference quickly gave way to the harsh truth of the Jim Crow era, where racism was still high and inescapable. But in this segregated world, music was lifeblood. It was in his genes. His father had a beautiful bass voice and led the section in the church choir, and his mother sang all day. By the age of 6, young Charles was already singing in church. Growing up during the Great Depression was rough, forcing him to work with his father, helping out the family however he could. As he entered his teens, his musical world expanded far beyond the church. He fell deeply in love with the blues, drawing influence from icons like Nat King Cole, T-Bone Walker, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Muddy Waters, and Little Walter. Yet, it wasn't just the blues. His true passion was big band music and the smoother sounds of artists like Frank Sinatra and Harry Belafonte. This unique, wide-ranging taste was the first clue to his future sound. Music was not his only ambition. He was a teenager with a deep curiosity, interested in photography and nursing an early desire to become a comedian. He even knew the legendary Red Fox from St. Louis. But the electric pull of the guitar was undeniable. While attending Sumner High School, the first high school for African Americans in St. Louis, which also boasted alumni like Tina Turner and Arthur Ashe, he learned techniques from his friend, Ira Harris. Chuck Berry started to master the instrument, carrying it everywhere. His undeniable talent was first truly recognized when he won the school talent show, performing the song, Confessing the Blues. In that moment, he knew, music was his destiny. He picked up work as a disc jockey, playing music at local dances and even on the military base for black soldiers. Yet, his path was turbulent. He dropped out in the 11th grade and began running with a bad crowd. In 1944, at just 18 years old, his reckless youth led to a profound consequence. Chuck and two friends decided to drive to Hollywood, but they ran out of money. In a desperate move, they hijacked a car at gunpoint with an old gun Chuck had found on the street. This was followed by a string of robberies targeting a bakery, a barber shop, and a clothing store. They were caught, arrested for armed robbery, and sentenced to 10 years in a reformatory for young men. It was a devastating start, but in the walls of that reformatory, Chuck Berry showed the self-determination that would define his life. He found solace in music, forming a gospel singing group with other black inmates for Sunday church. He also learned how to box. After serving about 3 years, he was released on his 21st birthday in 1947 for good behavior. A year later, he married the Meta Suggs. Now a free man, Chuck took on a variety of jobs: janitorial work, assembly plant labor, carpentry with his father, and even studying to become a hairdresser, eventually earning a cosmetology degree. But his first love, music, was calling. He started playing his guitar at local spots, mixing country, blues, and R&B all together, singing lead vocals. This unique blend was something new, and it drew crowds. In 1953, he joined pianist Johnny Johnson's band, Sir John Trio. The band often played country hillbilly music by artists like Hank Williams, alongside songs by Nat King Cole and Muddy Waters. When Chuck started singing, the crowd went crazy, leading Johnson to quickly make him the leader. The Sir John Trio became the hottest band in St. Louis, a position that put Chuck Berry in direct rivalry with Ike Turner. Chuck Berry was generating a serious buzz, and he knew he had to go to Chicago, the heart of the blues, to make a record. His destiny was set in motion when he finally met his idol, Muddy Waters, at a club in Chicago around 1955. Chuck asked Muddy how he could make a record, and Muddy gave him the golden ticket: go see Leonard Chess at Chess Records. The journey of the undisputed king of rock and roll was about to truly begin. When Chuck Berry finally walked into Chess Records in Chicago and met Leonard Chess, he brought with him a demo tape that would change the world. The tape contained an original cover of a hillbilly song called Ida Red by Bob Wills, but Chuck had completely rewritten the lyrics, infusing it with his own black experience and electric energy. Leonard Chess was instantly amazed at how Chuck turned a hillbilly tune into a black song. Chess asked him to change the title, and after spotting some mascara in the studio, they landed on Maybellene. They slightly altered the spelling to avoid a lawsuit from the cosmetics company. In July 1955, Maybellene was released, becoming an instant cultural explosion. It fused country and the blues into what the world would soon recognize as rock and roll. It soared to number 5 on the Billboard pop charts and hit number 1 on the R&B chart, selling over 1 million copies. The youth loved it. The key to its success was simple. Chuck Berry had taken a classic blues record and played it at a fast tempo. Rock and roll, at its heart, was just the blues sped up. Chuck realized his market was the teenagers, and he tailored his songwriting to them, singing about drag races, young crushes, and school days. However, the industry was immediately rigged against him. When Chuck received a copy of the Maybellene record, he noticed two other names, one of them being Alan Freed, listed as co-writers above his. This was a classic case of payola, still rampant in the music industry. Alan Freed, a powerful disc jockey, had the influence and power to put the music on the airwaves and guarantee exposure to millions. Freed played Maybellene constantly, and while Chuck had to give away a piece of his writing credit, he understood that this was the cost of mainstream access in a segregated industry. Later, Freed would lose his job and be banned as a disc jockey for years due to his involvement in payola. The success of Maybellene set the stage for an unstoppable run. In 1956, he released Roll Over Beethoven, a song that explicitly told the old guard that the blues and R&B were taking over, peaking at number 2 on the R&B chart. This song became a massive hit years later for the Beatles. By 1957, Chuck Berry had released his debut album, After School Session, featuring Too Much Monkey Business and Wee Wee Hours. But the song that defined him globally was yet to come. His song, School Days, was quickly considered a rock and roll anthem. In 1958, he unleashed the song that sealed his place in history, Johnny B. Goode. The track hit number 2 on the R&B chart and number 8 on the Hot 100. The phrase, "Go Johnny Go," became one of the most recognizable musical calls in the history of popular music. It was a song about a country boy, born in the Deep South, who could play the guitar just like ringing a bell. It was the ultimate, aspirational rock and roll narrative, and it represented the highest achievement of Chuck Berry's genius. On stage, Chuck Berry was electric. He introduced his famous duck walk, a stooping walk with knees bent, head vertical, that he originally developed as a child to retrieve things under a table. The move became his signature, a spectacle of confidence and joy that captivated integrated audiences across America. His music accomplished something politicians could not: it brought races together. While touring, Chuck Berry faced constant harassment and racism, especially from police. He was often not even allowed into his own gigs because security didn't believe the black man standing there was Chuck Berry, who sang a hillbilly song like Maybellene. However, when he performed, the black and white kids would mingle and dance together, often tearing down the rope that separated them in venues. The older, racist attendees were infuriated when the races mingled, but the power of the music transcended their hatred. Chuck Berry was a crossover artist whose genius broke down racial barriers, making him one of the most influential black artists of his time. Beyond his artistry, Chuck Berry was a remarkably smart businessman. He understood that genius alone was not enough. He invested wisely, opening Club Bandstand, and acquiring a movie theater, an apartment complex in Hollywood, and a park, Berry Park. This financial and commercial autonomy was a powerful act of defiance for a black artist in the 1950s, demonstrating that he could not only create culture but also own the means of its distribution and profit. His success seemed limitless. In July 1959, he released his third album, Chuck Berry Is on Top. He was featured in the concert documentary Jazz on a Summer's Day. But at the peak of his glory, his personal demons and the system's racist traps were waiting. Just months later, in December 1959, the music stopped. The sharp descent for the king of rock and roll began in December 1959. At the height of his career, after defining a whole new musical genre, Chuck Berry was arrested under the Notorious Men Act. This federal law, previously known as the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, criminalized the transportation of any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or any other immoral purpose. The legal system used the Mann Act as a weapon, disproportionately targeting black men who violated the racial norms of white society. This sentiment was confirmed by the case of Jack Johnson, the first African-American heavyweight boxing champion, who was charged under the same act for traveling with his white fiancée. The law was not about protecting women, it was about protecting the deeply rooted caste system of race in America. The details of Chuck Berry's charge were complicated and damning. He had traveled to Mexico and met Janice Escalante, an Apache Indian waitress who he described as pretty but homely. She told him she was 21, but in reality, she was only 14 and had a history as a prostitute. Chuck brought her back to St. Louis to work as a hostess and a hat-check girl at his newly opened club bandstand. He was having sex with her throughout their journey and during her brief stay in St. Louis. When Chuck fired her after a dispute, he offered to send her back to El Paso, but she insisted on Arizona. When he refused the specific request, she began prostituting near his club and was soon picked up by the police. Out of revenge or desperation, she told the authorities everything, including that she was only 14 and had been repeatedly violated, sometimes even in the back of his Cadillac. Chuck Berry was immediately taken to trial. He was convicted of transporting her just 2 days before Christmas. He was fined $5,000 and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The severity of the sentence and the blatant racism from the bench shocked observers. The judge was openly hostile. Throughout the trial, he never referred to Chuck by his name, instead calling him the Negro. In a moment of terrifying, public prejudice, the judge told Chuck Berry that he would not let him loose to go out and prey on a lot of ignorant Indian girls and colored girls and white girls if any. Chuck and his lawyers successfully appealed the decision, arguing that the judge's racist comments and attitude had prejudiced the all-white jury. The case was thrown out, but a second trial was ordered. He lost again but received a lighter sentence of 3 years. This incident was not isolated. Just 3 months earlier, he was arrested in Kansas City on another Mann Act charge for traveling with a 17-year-old French white girl. He beat that case only because the girl claimed to be in love with him. These events underscore the dangerous tightrope he walked. The system was built to punish black men who crossed racial lines, regardless of their artistic stature. His father had warned him his entire life, "Don't mess with them white women." Chuck Berry finally entered prison. While he was incarcerated, the rock and roll world kept spinning, accelerated by the very sound he had invented. He spent 20 months behind bars, but he used his time wisely. True to the industrious nature he developed during his first stint in the reformatory, he educated himself, earning his GED, studying business law, accounting, and American history. He learned to type and served as the physical therapy secretary in the prison. He also brought his guitar and writing materials into his cell, working on what would eventually become his autobiography. He would even perform songs for the inmates. When he was released on October 18, 1963, the world of music had dramatically shifted. While America was still struggling to catch up with his integrated music, the world outside was celebrating him. He was surprised to find that his music was now more popular than ever overseas, particularly in the UK. The British invasion had begun, spearheaded by bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. These groups, who grew up idolizing Chuck, were remaking his songs like Roll Over Beethoven and Rock and Roll Music, turning his American hits into global smash hits. Chuck Berry's influence had been so absolute that his imitators brought him a second wave of fame and fortune, proving that true genius is indestructible, even if the man himself was temporarily imprisoned. Despite his past and the efforts of the American judicial system to silence him, the world decreed that Chuck Berry was immortal. His music, particularly the iconic Johnny B. Goode, transcended not just racial barriers, but also planetary boundaries. In 1977, his song was included on the Golden Record and sent to space with the Voyager mission. It was chosen to represent humanity and the Earth's greatest achievements to any extraterrestrial life that might stumble across it. The phrase, "Go Johnny Go," became the literal soundtrack of our species, cementing Chuck Berry as the global king of rock and roll. On Earth, he continued to be a legend. He performed on the lawn of the White House for President Jimmy Carter, received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1984, and was, fittingly, the very first person inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986. As he aged, Chuck Berry developed a reputation as the solo performer. In the 1980s, he often toured the U.S., playing up to 100 shows a year, bringing only his guitar and demanding cash payment up front from promoters. His rule was absolute: find local musicians to back him up, and it was the promoter's responsibility to pay them. Chuck wouldn't pay anyone anything. He was notoriously cheap, often driving instead of flying to save money. This habit reflected his deep distrust, born from his early experiences with payola and the legal system that had once stripped him of his royalties and his freedom under the Mann Act. He fiercely protected his creation and his profit. This protectiveness led to dramatic conflicts, notably with Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, who was a lifelong admirer but once got punched by Chuck for simply touching his guitar backstage. Even his status as a living legend could not protect him from his persistent demons. In 1979, he was sentenced to 4 months in prison for tax evasion, due to $$200,000 worth of unpaid taxes. He broke down crying in court. The darkest chapter returned in 1989. A former cook and over 200 female employees and customers filed a class action lawsuit against him, alleging that he had installed hidden video cameras in the ladies' restroom of his Southern Air restaurant and his park. The tapes were allegedly created for his sexual fetishes. This shocking breach of trust devastated his community and tarnished his legacy with a stain that would never fully fade. The suit was settled out of court for an estimated $1.2 million. Chuck Berry remained a profoundly complex figure, a brilliant innovator whose life became a continuous battleground between his genius, his drive for self-preservation, and the constant shadows cast by his choices and the oppressive system that haunted him since his first arrest under the Mann Act. Some stories end without closure. But dignity doesn't need applause. The complex tapestry of Charles Edward Anderson Berry's life concluded on March 18, 2017, when he died of cardiac arrest at the age of 90. The news confirmed what the world already knew: the original king of rock and roll was gone. Yet, his departure was merely a transition for his music, not an ending. His estate was valued at $$50 million, a testament to the business acumen he first honed while in the reformatory. His cherry red Gibson ES-335 guitar, the instrument of revolution, was buried alongside him, bolted inside the lid of his coffin. The most profound legacy, however, was not in the millions he amassed, but in the woman who stood beside him. His wife, the Meta Suggs, remained by his side through every headline, every legal battle, from the robbery conviction to the Mann Act charges, the tax evasion, and the humiliating camera scandal. Their commitment, stretching over 70 years, offers a singular, emotional anchor to the life of a man whose genius often seemed incompatible with human vulnerability. Chuck Berry gave us a language, a rhythm, and a swagger that redefined what a black artist could achieve in a racially hostile America. He created Maybellene, the song that integrated the airwaves. He wrote Johnny B. Goode, a story about a simple boy that traveled the farthest of any song in human history. He set a standard that every generation of musicians must measure itself against, proving that even after his freedom was stripped away by the racist machinery of the Mann Act, his art remained untouchable. His journey forces us to confront the harsh American paradox, a pioneering genius often celebrated only after he was broken, and whose complexities were often reduced to tabloid headlines. Yet, his truth lies in the power he gifted us, the power to transcend, to dance, and to believe that a song can, quite literally, change the world. To anyone who's ever stood alone, like Chuck, navigating a hostile world, we see you. To anyone who found their voice through a guitar and an amplifier, this is your moment. We remember the sound of Maybellene, the call of Johnny B. Goode, and the life of a complicated man who redefined music. He was the undisputed king of rock and roll, and his legacy continues to stand tall against the shadow of the Mann Act. If this story reminds you of the sacrifices pioneers make, share it below. And join us by subscribing, as we read every comment, honoring the giants whose shoulders we stand on. Thank you for watching.